And right now, we are 2 minutes away from the end of the trading day. Romaine Bostick here with Katie Greifeld, taking you through to that closing bell with a global simulcast. Carol Massar, Tim Stenovec, bring them in right now as we welcome our audiences across all of our Bloomberg platforms, television, radio, our partnership with YouTube. Another wild and crazy day here on Wall Street. Carol Massar, and some big earnings set to cross the wire in a matter of minutes.
Right, and one of those big earnings, probably the biggest, is Alphabet, right? And I'm looking at this stock that's had quite a swing today, down more than 3% at its lows, up about 1% at its highs, and right now heading into earnings just a few minutes away, down about 2%. But again, it'll be another part of the AI trade, the AI story. We'll see what Alphabet has to say about that.
Yeah, CapEx investment is certainly going to be a focus for investors, and then integration of Gemini across the platform. I don't know about you, Katie, but I'm starting to use Gemini more and more, just in Google search than I am as versus the LLMs like Claude and ChatGPT.
Do you have a cold, Tim?
I'm a little bit stuffy.
That's all right.
I'll tell you what, the Sudafed doesn't hit like it used to.
Man, that's because you use too much of it. But
yeah, you got to get the bootleg stuff, man.
When it comes to Alphabet, I'm also really interested to hear about their recent partnership with Apple. Any update on that would be nice. Also very interested in Waymo, maybe some of these sort of side bets here. I will note that heading into earnings, you take a look at analyst coverage of Alphabet, not a single sell rating on this stock.
Yeah, and I mean, we talk about this idea here of sort of where people are looking for the winners and losers. We're going to find out maybe where that progress is on that front. Another wild day on Wall Street. Stocks actually opened relatively solid at the start. They were in the red. We saw a big plunge lower about midday through the session with the NASDAQ down about 2.5% here on the day, and the S&P 500 at one point dropping as much as 1.1%. However, as you see the closing bells and you see the closing numbers there on your screen, and for our radio audience, I'll read them out to you. The S&P only down about 35 points or a half a percentage point on the day. The NASDAQ down about 350 points or 1.5% on the day. But the Dow Jones Industrial Average, a jump of more than 200 points or about a half a percentage point. The Russell 2000, though, is going to finish in the red, down by about 0.9%. All
right, so finishing off our best and worst levels of the session, taking a quick look at the big caps, the S&P 500, Katie, 363 names gaining ground today, 139 to the downside.
Yeah, it's interesting. There are more gainers than losers in this market, and you can see that at the sector level as well, as told by our friend The Circle. Big tech, that's the reason why, down about 1.9% as a sector. That's going to be a giant weight lower on the overall index. Communication services, consumer discretionary, also not having too great of a day. In terms of what did perform today, energy higher by more than 2%, materials, real estate, and healthcare. Of course, we know it was a big day for Eli Lilly, Carol.
All right, let me get to two of the top gainers in the S&P 500. Supermicro up 14% in today's session, or just shy of 14%. Certainly an outperformer. This one jumping on a strong outlook. Company gave a forecast for sales in the current quarter that signaled strong demand for its gear to run AI data centers. So a lot of optimism there. And I just want to flip on over quickly to Eli Lilly. Again, top performer in the S&P 500, a gain of 10%. Provided an upbeat sales forecast for the year today. So some outperformance there. And we've got Qualcomm crossing.
Yeah, Qualcomm earnings just crossing the wire. The chip maker basically saying that for the first quarter, the fiscal first quarter, adjusted EPS did beat $3.50 a share. The street for looking for $3.41, $12.25 billion in revenue, basically in line with street estimates. For the current quarter, the forecast, adjusted EPS for the second quarter, $2.45. That's light. The street was looking for $2.65. And Katie, on the revenue side, the company says look for about $10.2 to $11 billion in revenue. Those shares right now down about 6%.
All right, let's get to Alphabet here as well. Alphabet, here's one of the big headlines. 2026 CapEx seen between $175 billion to $185 billion. The estimate was for $119.5 billion. So certainly ahead of those estimates there. In terms of fourth quarter revenue, it looks like that beat estimates, coming in at $113.83 billion. The estimate had been for just above $111 billion here. Operating income also actually coming in a little bit lighter than expectations, $35.9 billion. The estimate had been for $36.95 billion. And one more before we move on. Fourth quarter Google Cloud revenue coming in at $17.66 billion. The estimate had been for $16.05 $6.2 billion. You can see shares lower currently by about 3% as traders parse through this.
Yeah, Katie, I know you said that CapEx number, but it's worth repeating. 175 to 185 billion is what the company sees for 2026. The estimate was for $119.5 billion. Hey, I do want to move on over to ARM Holdings. Shares in the after hours of ARM Holdings down more than 10% as we speak. Third quarter adjusted operating income came in above estimates. Third quarter total revenue came in above estimates at $1.24 billion. Third quarter adjusted net revenue coming in at 457, beating estimates. I'm just looking for the outlook here. We're getting some, not quite seeing an outlook at this point. Oh, here we go. Fourth quarter revenue, $1.47 billion to $1.48 billion. That's ahead of estimates of $1.43 billion. Shares in the after hours of ARM Holdings down 10.4%.
Yeah, all right. So ARM taking a hit here in the after hours. Let's bring up the numbers for Alphabet once more, because that stock we saw under some pressure. I got to go back to the CapEx expenditures. All right, right now shares of Alphabet are down 6.5% here, seeing 2026 CapEx $175 billion to $185 billion. The street estimate way below that at $119.5 billion. Again, some questions maybe among investors. These companies in terms of valuations, the spend, looking for the ROI on this. I'm just going to Gemini monthly active users. Of course, Gemini, their AI tool, 750 million monthly active users. We're seeing that. So
I want to know how they measure that, though. Like, Romaine, is that people who are using Gemini as a standalone app, or is that people who are like me who are using it as part of Google?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Because it's integrated now across platforms. You can do this you can use this in Gmail now.
Yeah, it is a good question. And I mean, we'll try to get some answers a little bit later out of some of our guests on the close who might have that. But it gets to this idea, too, as to how we're measuring sort of the future growth. And one thing I want to go back to is the cost side. I mean, I know CapEx is the big focus, but you talk about a company growing revenue at about a 15% clip. Costs overall are also basically matching that as well. And of course, when you dive deeper into the actual CapEx and research development costs, that goes up even higher. Now, obviously, there's a promise of something there. And if you believe what Sundar Pichai is saying in the earnings statement here, he does see phenomenal growth for that Gemini, for the new Gemini rollout. And maybe that becomes a salve, Tim, with regards to that cost spend. Yeah,
shares of Alphabet falling as much as 7.5% on that higher CapEx. But some companies are beneficiaries of that. If you take a look at NVIDIA after hours, that's up 1% on this idea of Alphabet spending more than expected, Katie, on CapEx.
Right. It's interesting because Alphabet, just the latest example of a big tech company coming out and giving a very big CapEx guide, and you're seeing the reaction in shares here, though. But that's a good news, of course, for some of those companies, such as NVIDIA.
But also, like, think about how much they've ramped up, right? I mean, we talk about a company that was spending like less than half of this in terms of CapEx just a year ago, right? And so the question is, where's the return? Have we seen it already? Are we going to see it later this year?
Well, let me just go to the press release because Sundar Pichai, CEO of Alphabet and Google, saying we're seeing our AI investments in infrastructure drive revenue and growth across the board. And so he says to meet the customer demand and capitalize on the growing opportunities. He talks about that CapEx number. But I also think, you need to look at, growth across some of the other businesses. YouTube's annual revenue surpassing $60 billion across ads and subscriptions. So monetizing that. They say they now have over 325 million paid subscriptions across consumer services. And they talk about adoption for Google One and YouTube Premium, and Google Cloud ending 2025 at that annual run rate of over $70 billion, representing a wide breadth of customers driven by demand for AI products. So digging a little bit deeper into this on the call will certainly be important. Look at Alphabet, went down about 1% here.
Yeah, and it gets to this idea, too, when we talk about the AI spend. And of course, it was just a few quarters ago where these companies were being rewarded for that CapEx spend. But we talk about this idea, too, of the outperformance that we've seen in Alphabet. And we should point out, it's still not really of a barn burner of a stock, but compared to its other, Mag 7 brethren here, it has been a phenomenal outperformance. It gives the idea that maybe investors, they're looking at the Microsofts and some of the other names in that space and realizing that maybe, at least among the mega caps, that maybe Alphabet might actually be a bit better of a value proposition.
And just quickly before we go back to that CapEx figure, we were talking about NVIDIA rising and the wake of these results, Broadcom too. If you take a look at the function SPLC on the Bloomberg terminal, when you take a look at Alphabet suppliers, NVIDIA, Broadcom, right at the top there. So this huge CapEx forecast coming from Alphabet, once again, that is great news for their suppliers.
All right, the stock shares of Alphabet still down roughly 2% here in the aftermarket.